Everyone, it's Karri Lindsey with Brix Realty, and I am going to show you today how to complete our listing agreement for the Florida market. So for our listing agreements with Brix, you can go to .loop, and if you create a listing loop, all of your required forms are going to be in here. Okay, so you would go to the Florida exclusive right to sell agreement. Make sure that down here at the bottom, it's ERS-18TB. TB stands for transaction broker. So Brix Realty functions as a transaction broker. And so all of our listing agreements and all of our buyer agency agreements, if we were to do those, are all done under transaction broker. Okay, so the first thing that you want to do would be you're going to put your seller's name in here. So your seller is going to be who has ownership rights of the property that is being sold. So for instance, I am going to, if you need help getting to the CRS tax suite from your MLS, from the homepage, go to menu and then go to taxes and do CRS tax search. Okay. And I'm going to pull up just an example. Okay, so right here it says current owner. So if I am going to list this home, I am going to put Samuel A. Case as my owner in the seller's box. Now, if Samuel is married, it's best to have husband and wife both sign. If the husband and wife are going through a divorce, that can kind of be a sticky situation. If they're amicable, then usually you can go ahead. They're both probably going to have to sign the property, especially if it's homesteaded. If it's in a trust or a corporation, you need to see the trust documents in order to be able to determine who has signing capability. And for a corporation, you also want to make sure that the person that is saying that they can sell has signing capability. And you can get into Sunbiz and check for signing rights for the corporation to make sure that the correct individual is who is actually is going to be able to sign this document for you. Okay, so you put in your seller here, and then your broker is going to be Brix Realty. Okay, so that's what you're going to put in there. The listing agreement is between the broker and the seller. It is not between the agent and the seller. So even though you're a representative of the brokerage, the broker actually owns the listing. Down here, it's talking about authority to sell. The seller is going to give the broker the exclusive right to sell their property for this determined amount of time. Now, I typically like to say at least 6 months, right? And especially in the market that we have been in, you definitely should be able to sell a property if it's priced correctly within a 6-month period of time. So don't like to go any less than 3 months. However, one of the things that makes Brix unique is that we do a day-to-day listing agreement. So that is something that even though you're signing, let's say, a 6-month agreement with your seller, you can tell them that if at any time they are unhappy with your service and choose not to work with you, then we would let them out of their contract. And so there would be no obligation there. So again, try to use your best judgment based on your conversations with your seller. But I would prefer if you could do a 6-month listing agreement. That way you're not having to worry about extending it on the off chance that it doesn't sell. And that gives you plenty of time to market it and get it sold for the seller. The description of the property, you're going to go back again to the tax sheet. So right here, and you're going to put in the property address exactly as it's on the tax record. And then for the legal description, again, back to your tax record, scroll down here to the bottom. And this legal description is quite long. So if it will not fit in the listing agreement line here, what you can do is do a blank sheet of paper, copy your legal description, click see attachment and put exhibit A or attachment A, and then also put attachment A on the document that you created and upload it to the loop And then I would always have my seller initial or sign that page saying that they verified that that's the correct legal description. Okay, so if you have a really long legal description, you're probably going to have to do a separate sheet to be able to put that on there. Same thing with personal property. So if you are listing a home, you want to know everything that the seller is including in the sale. So it says here, including appliances. So again, it's not going to hurt to be specific, to say, all appliances in the kitchen, if there is a refrigerator in the garage, if they're leaving the washer and dryer, if they have other personal property like a shed or an above ground pool or a golf cart or other furnishings. If you're selling a condo and they're selling it completely furnished, make sure that you're putting in here everything that the seller is leaving that is included with the sale. And again, if it's too much and there's not enough room, make sure that you get a separate piece of paper and have the seller list everything that's included in the sale. The other thing that I would suggest is that if there are things that the seller is not going to leave with the property, that you also get a list of that as well, so that you can put that in agent notes so that it's aware upfront and you have disclosed that these particular items are not staying with the property. If it happens to be, I think the common example is, great grandma's chandelier that the seller absolutely loves and is not wanting to take, a really good idea would be to have the conversation with the seller to actually remove that and replace it with a new light prior to even listing. Buyers sometimes, when they go through homes, automatically think that everything that they see, especially if it's attached and considered a fixture, is going to stay. So on those items that, let's say, are attached, if it's a special mirror or, again, a chandelier or the Ring doorbell or the Nest thermostat, if those things are not being left, then it's best for the seller to replace those prior to going live in the MLS. That way there's just no question. But always make sure that if something isn't being left, that you're putting it in agent notes. That way you're disclosing it up front. Okay. Down here, we're talking about occupancy. Is the property occupied by a tenant? If it is, then you click is occupied by a tenant, and when does the lease expire? And then at some point, you'll have to get a copy of the lease agreement from the seller, because you will end up providing that to the buyer once you go under contract. If it's not, then you just click is not currently occupied. The price, you're going to do a CMA before you get to the listing appointment. And we haven't talked a lot about CMAs. The way that I usually do is I give, I do a 3-level, I guess is what I would call it. So I do a in not so good condition price, I do an average price, and I do, a really excellent condition based on the comps that I'm looking at. So the comps that you pull for, your beds, your bath, your square footage, and your location, you're going to be able to see what a really good quality home is priced at versus one that is, let's say, in need of lots of repairs. So when you go in, if you haven't already seen the house, have those ideas in your mind, and you are more than welcome to go to a listing presentation with a range. So let's say it's a $20,000 range. Maybe it's a $50,000 range. You've got 200 to 350 or 200 to 300. If it's in really poor condition, you're going to be on the low end of that. If it's in fantastic condition or there's upgrades that they didn't tell you about, then you're probably going to be on the high end of that. So again, your CMA is a competitive market analysis of comparable properties. But if you've not viewed it, which happens a lot in some of our situations when we get these appointments, you haven't been able to view the property, and the first time that you're going to the property is the first time that you've seen it. So try to get as much information as you can from the seller when you're doing your seller consult. And that'll help a little bit. But again, don't feel bad about going to a listing presentation with a range and then knowing in your mind, based on the pictures and everything that you've done for your research, you should be able to price it once you see the property. So again, you're going to go over your CMA with your customer. They're going to probably have in their own mind what they want to sell the property for. And so it's basically coming to terms with an agreement between the two of you that here's what we're going to sell it for. And that's the price that you put right there. Financing terms. Again, I suggest checking all of them. The more you check, the bigger the buyer pool is going to be for the seller. Now, if you know that you're going to sell it in as-is condition because the seller refuses to make absolutely any repairs, it's going to be really hard for a VA and FHA buyer to be able to put an offer and probably see that one through to closing if the buyer does not have enough cash to make those repairs if the seller chooses not to do so. So again, keep in consideration the type of property that you're listing and does it qualify for these types of financing terms. Usually always cash and conventional. Sometimes here in Milton, and I think there's some places in Crestview, they do qualify for USDA. So you could check other here and put USDA here. Just always make sure if you're doing USDA that you are checking the address to make sure that it's in a USDA area. Also, if you're listing a condo, you want to make sure that you're checking the condo for the county to make sure that it is approved by VA and FHA, okay? And those lists are out there. Seller financing. I usually, again, I talked about this in the contract video that I did. I don't usually recommend the seller do financing. If they want to do that and want to offer that, I would request that they would go talk to, if they haven't already, to legal counsel and or a lender and their tax accountant, just to make sure that they've covered all of their bases and it's a good financial decision for them to do that. Assumption of mortgage, again, the same thing. So we haven't seen this a lot because interest rates have been really low. However, because we've had really low interest rates and now we have considerably higher interest rates, we may start seeing, especially on FHA loans, the seller wanting to advertise that they have a low interest rate and allow the potential buyer to assume that mortgage. So again, you want to make sure that the seller is talking to their lender to confirm that they have an assumable mortgage, and they're talking to their tax accountant and a legal representative to make sure that all of the documentation to protect the seller is being taken care of during our process if they decide to go that route. Seller expenses. So here, this is saying the seller will pay mortgage discount or other closing costs not to exceed a certain percentage. So I don't think that we need to have our sellers upfront commit to actually paying a percentage of the buyer's closing costs. I think that is something that can be negotiated through the contract. So I don't ever want to obligate my seller upfront in saying that they would do that. So I usually put 0% in here. Again, make sure you're completing all of your blanks and all of your items that need to be filled out so that way your listing agreement is complete. At the bottom of every page, the seller is going to need to initial. So if it's one seller, you only need one seller to initial if you've got a husband and wife. If you end up having, let's say I have a listing that's coming probably in October where I've got 3 siblings and they inherited a brother's property. So I'm going to have to add another initial field here because they all 3 are owners. So they'll all 3 go on the listing agreement and they'll all 3 have to initial all of the documents, not just the listing agreement, but any contract that we go under because they're all sellers. So make sure that you're aware of that. And then down here at the bottom, it says broker/sales associate. You really just need the sales associate to initial down here. If you want me to initial it, I'm happy to. If you want me to check it over, I can do that. However, you are more than welcome just to sign here. I don't need to initial this. Okay, so talks about the authority that the seller gives to the broker. So we're going to market it to the public, and it goes through all the things that we're going to do: flyers, yard signs, digital marketing, broker website, yada, yada. We are also going to market the property to real estate agents outside of the office. We're going to put transaction signs on the property unless 6B1 is checked, and we'll get to that in just a second. We're also going to use the seller's name in connection with marketing or advertising of the property. The seller's name will actually go in the MLS, and you're not able to put on file unless you check the tax record and it says under owner, like withheld or not available or undisclosed. And that means that that actual seller has applied for and been approved by the state to have their name withheld. And it's usually reserved for judges, politicians, like Hollywood, actresses, actors, anybody that would have like a public profile that they may not want their name to be disclosed out there. So if their name shows up here, then you need to be putting their name in the MLS. Okay, so here's a checkbox where it says display the property on the internet except the street address. Okay, well, that's going to be really hard. A lot of our buyers, are moving here from other states. And so if you're going to display their property on the internet, but you're not going to tell them where it's located, the buyer is probably not going to be interested in that property and they're going to move on because they're not going to know if it's in an area that they want to live. So make sure that you're explaining all of these opt-out potential criteria to your seller. So not publicly market to the seller. So if the seller doesn't authorize you to put the property on the MLS, they're really tying your hands behind your back because the MLS is a way that provides your listing to all of the other agents out there and then gets syndicated to like the 450 different websites, realtor.com, Trulia, Zillow, homes.com, all of those. So if you don't put it in the MLS, it's not going to syndicate out. It's really going to limit your marketing. You're also not going to be able to put a for sale sign in their yard. So you're not going to get sign calls. So after you explain all of this and the benefits to allowing you to market your home in the normal way through the normal channels, if they still refuse and say, no, I don't want you to display the property on the MLS and you can display the property on the internet, but you can't put my street address in, they have to initial here. So whether it's one seller or if there's a husband and wife, whatever, they have to initial here if they're opting out. If they're not opting out, leave this blank. So ideally, we want these to be blank. Okay, so these are just some other things. So we're going to check that we're going to use a lockbox. I do recommend that you spend the money and get a lockbox. And the reason for that is when you use the Supra lockbox, it will log and track every entry and every exit that an agent does into that home. So I'll give an example, and I don't know of any, bad examples using combo boxes, but like if you were to use a combo box, which on a vacant property is probably not that big of a deal, but if it's an owner occupied property, then you probably really do want to spend the money. And then it's something that you can say for your marketing, hey, I'm not an agent that uses a combo box. I'm an agent that actually cares about the security of my client's property, and I'm going to use a lockbox, a Supra lockbox. But if you were to, let's say, provide the combo, because a lot of agents will be like, yeah, text me for the combo. And so you text them. Well, if their phone doesn't have a lock on it and they lose their phone and somebody were to get it and check their text messages, they could get the combo box to a house. Anybody could get that combo box if they lost their phone. And I know that seems like an extreme example, but again, that combo is the only thing that's standing in the way of somebody getting into that person's home. And so you want to make sure that if you're using a combo box, that you're keeping it secure and only giving it to an agent who you've spoken to and who has scheduled a showing. But again, I recommend that you use the lockbox. It's just less liability for you as the agent. Withholding verbal offers and then withholding offers once the seller accepts the sales contract. I'll give you my opinion. I'll let you handle it however you would like. So personally, I don't accept verbal offers. Now, that doesn't mean that I wouldn't talk to my seller if I received a verbal offer, but checking this box means that you're not obligated to tell them if you had a verbal offer, and you're not obligated to give them a sales contract once the property goes under contract. If these are checked, then you definitely don't have to do it. You're not obligated to do it. If they're left unchecked, then you need to give verbal offers. And you need to, you need to provide all sales contracts towards the end, until you get to closing. So the problem with verbal offers is you may get an agent that puts out a feeler or whatever. And the best advice that I could give you is to tell them, a verbal offer is not an offer, put it in writing. And then I'll present it to my seller. And if they keep saying, hey, do you think they take 400? Put it in writing, and then I'll present it to my seller. Don't waste your time. If they're not going to take the time to place, to write up an offer, then don't waste your time. On withholding all offers, I think the thought process behind this is let's say you're under contract. If your seller gets another offer that happens to be better than the first one, it can cause them sometimes to think the grass is greener on the other side, and they may not work as hard to make the deal that you already have under contract work. And so that's just a risk. And again, I'll leave it up to you on how you want to do it. If you check withhold all offers and then have your listing agent sign it, it doesn't mean that if you get an offer after you're under contract that you can't not present it. And then the flip side of that. So if you are presenting all offers on the off chance that the contract that you're under falls through, then you have other offers that you might be able to go back to those buyer's agents and say, hey, at no fault of the seller, our property is back on the market. You placed an offer. Would your buyer still be interested? So there's good and bad to both. And so I will let you all choose. We don't really have a position on this within the brokerage. Virtual office websites are just that. They're websites for agents that may not have a brick and mortar office. Okay. So if your seller does not authorize the use of, let's say, a Zestimate, then that property will not go on Zillow. It will not feed via IDX because that's what Zillow does. That's what they're known for, is their Zestimate. So the way that I have been trained is that if you explain this to your seller that no, they do not authorize an automated estimate of their market value, then it will not go on Zillow or Trulia or any of these other websites that provide an automated algorithm of value. Okay. So again, they're limiting their marketing. Now down here as well, this is another one. So does not authorize third parties to write comments or reviews about the listing of the property. So there are some websites that if a client goes or a buyer goes and views a property, they can leave comments. Again, I will leave this up to you. I think that sometimes, especially if you end up with a seller where you're overpriced or, you've told them about several things that they feel like should be maybe upgraded, or like you really need to have the carpets cleaned because it smells like pet urine or whatever, and they don't take you seriously and it doesn't get done and the house sits on the market. If the seller is able to see on various websites that people are leaving comments, hey, I went and viewed this house and it smelled really bad, then they might be more apt to listen to your suggestions or listen to the suggestions of the public, because that's probably what is not causing their home to sell. So again, I will leave these up to you. I typically leave those blank. And I don't believe, I've been on a ton of, real estate websites looking at a ton of homes, and I haven't seen very many comments from sellers or comments on sellers' properties, that would be, let's say, derogatory. So again, I don't think it's that big of a deal. The seller's obligation. So the seller is going to cooperate with us. They're going to refer anybody that calls them, or if somebody goes up and knocks on their door, anybody that inquires about the property, they're going to transfer to us. They're not going to handle that on their own. So you need to explain that to them, that if anybody contacts them while their house is under this listing agreement with you, they need to forward that person to you. They are going to recognize that the broker may be subject to additional MLS obligations and potential penalties for failing to comply with them. They're going to provide keys to the broker to the property, and they're going to make it available to show during reasonable times. Now, here's that term reasonable, and that is very subjective. So when I go to a listing presentation, here's what I say. We need to make the home available to show as much as possible every day during the week. So what I suggest and what I start out with is 9 a.m. to 7 p.m., 7 days a week. Now, if there's times that don't work for you, we can work around those and we can put those specifically into showing time. I usually offer my sellers an hour notice and I ask them if that is enough time. Sometimes they're like, no, I need 2 hours notice because I've got 3 kids and I've got 2 dogs and I've, got to get everything organized and I want to make sure the house is clean. That's fine. You can also set up that in showing time as well. But always set the expectation that the more the house is available to show, the faster it will sell. They're going to inform the broker if they decide to lease it or to take out another mortgage on it or further encumber the property. So they need to keep you abreast of any changes that they potentially could make to that property. They're going to hold you harmless for losses, damages, and costs and expenses in any nature, including attorney's fees, liability from any person that we would incur because of their negligence, representation, misrepresentation, etc. FIRPTA deals with foreign sellers. So if that is, if you're going to deal with a foreign seller, you want to make sure that you are performing and that the seller is performing to their specific responsibilities. We, as a brokerage, I don't have a lot of experience with FIRPTA, and I'm not sure a lot of people do. It's kind of rare. We have much more foreign buyers than we do foreign sellers. So again, we would probably want to reach out for legal counsel just to make sure that we're doing everything correctly if we end up having a foreign seller. You are going to make legal all required disclosures, including all facts that materially affect the property's value and are not readily observable or known by the buyer. So down here, what I usually do, and this includes everything. So local building codes, if they didn't pull permits for, for any improvements to their homes, if they put on, new exterior doors and didn't pull a permit, if they know that they should have pulled a permit and did the work anyway, they need to disclose that to the next buyer. If there was a leak in the roof and in the ceiling and they fixed it and you're not able to tell, they also need to provide that. Anything that they know that could affect the value of the property or the buyer's perception of the value of the property, they need to know. And they need to disclose it. If they tell you something and tell you don't disclose it, you're within your right and obligation with the NAR Code of Ethics to tell them that you have to disclose any material fact that could affect the value of the property. Okay. So here what I put is I put C, seller's disclosure. And while a seller's disclosure is not mandated by Florida as a state, Brix Realty does mandate that all of our agents who take listings are going to make their sellers sign a seller's disclosure. And if the seller refuses, then I would pull up a blank seller's disclosure and put client declines to complete and have them sign it and initial it and upload it into .loop to cover yourself. The only time a seller's disclosure is not required by Brix would be in new construction, where you don't really have a seller's disclosure. Again, we're going to tell them that, we're realtors and we are not a lawyer. We don't have tax experience. We don't have environmental experience. We're not knowledgeable necessarily in foreign reporting requirements. And so if any of these specific things comes up, if you don't know, do not give advice to a buyer or a seller on anything that you are not 100% confident on. Always refer them. Okay. That makes you look like the professional. You don't want to step out of your lane and make any wrong, you don't want to give any wrong advice because that could put your license, the broker's license, and the brokerage at risk. Okay. Compensation. Okay. So here at the top, this is going to be your total compensation that you are going to charge. So ideally, we would like to get 6% as a brokerage. That's where we would like to be. So 6% here, and then we split it 50% with the buyer side, which is a little bit further down below. So you would put 6% here. We charge a $350 processing fee to Stacks Processing that is not optional. So whether or not you decide to use any of Stacks services, they do make sure from an audit perspective that we are in compliance. And so that $350 is charged to the seller. Okay. If you don't want to charge it to your seller, then you're going to be assuming that cost yourself. So you would put 6% plus $350 right here. We don't do options. If you need to do an option, please call me and let me know about that. Same thing with leases. We don't do leases either. So really we only are doing residential. So B and C should be 0 and 0. Okay, so here is our protection period. So there have been situations where you have a listing agreement with the seller and a buyer comes through and they really like the property, and somehow the buyer and the seller get in touch with each other and they try to cut the agent out of the deal. It does not happen very often, but it has happened. And this particular paragraph in almost every listing agreement that I've ever seen shows you that it's happened. So what they do is the seller's like, hey, I want to cancel. And then, 30 days later, they're under contract with the buyer that you had shown the property, and they go under contract and then you don't get your commission. Okay, so this protection period here is, I put 180 days. If you want to put less, you can. Some people put 30, some people put 60. I was always taught 180. Okay, so as long as the seller does not list with another agent, you are protected for 180 days should the seller sell the home and it happens to be a buyer that you can prove you showed the property to during your listing agreement. Okay? Now, if they list with another agent, then this whole section is void. Okay? Retained deposits. So I usually leave this one blank. Again, you can put in the 50% if you want to. That's fine. I guess I said don't be lazy. So what this says, or you can put 0%. And again, I'm going to leave this up to you. We don't have a broker standard on this as of yet, but this says basically if the buyer defaults and the seller gets a portion of the earnest money for liquidated damages, this would say that you would get 50%. So let's say you've got a property that went under contract and the seller put $10,000 or the buyer put $10,000 in earnest money down. And the buyer and seller come to an agreement and $5,000 is going to go to the seller. So the seller is going to get $5,000. This states that you would get half of that $5,000. Some brokerages think that that's great, fine and dandy. I don't really have a preference either way. So again, some people put 0 because they don't feel like necessarily that the seller is the one that really lost out because they didn't get to sell their house. And so that's, a small percentage of compensation for them for the stress and the strain of going under contract and then having a buyer default. Again, I don't have a preference. So whatever you choose to put in there is fine. Just know that your compensation cannot be any more than what your total compensation would be. So here, it cannot exceed the 8A. Whoops, I'm sorry. Right here. It can't exceed the 6%. Okay. So if somebody were to do an outlandish deposit on, like, let's say a really expensive home and it was $100,000, you're not going to be able to get more than what your total commission would be. Okay. I hope that makes sense. So again, somewhere between 0 and 50% is fine. Okay. So this is going to talk about cooperation with other brokers. So when you put your listing in the MLS, you're putting in there the percentage that you're going to pay the other agent who brings a buyer. Okay. And so there are 3 different types. So you're going to put here, you're going to check this box and you're going to put half. Again, we want to split it 50-50. Brix would like and highly recommends that if you're taking a 6% listing, that you split it 50% with your buyer's agent. Okay. Now, in certain circumstances, some agents, depending on, like I said, on the circumstance, wants to do 3.5, 2.5. If you're not going to do 50%, then I would like you to, call and explain, because again, most of, every closing that I have done here, I think I've only had one where the listing agent charged more for herself than she gave me. And I'll tell you, you don't figure that out until you get to the Alta statement at the very end. And sometimes it's really disheartening when you feel like you've worked really hard to make a deal go through and you see that they got a percentage more than you did. It leaves a bad taste in your mouth. So again, I recommend you do 50%. If you don't want to split your commission 50-50, I think Curtis would be okay with you just, having a quick conversation with me and just explaining why. Okay, so again, we're going into the assumption we're doing 50%. So if you get a 6% listing, you're going to put 3%, and then I always put 0 here to a single agent. Okay, so this is an agent that has a fiduciary relationship. We're going to put 3%. You're going to check this box, or $0. Oops, $0 to a transaction broker for the buyer. And then if they're unrepresented, this is where you don't have to do 50%. I would say, on the average in our area, I see a lot of people either doing 1% or 0 to somebody that has no brokerage relationship. Okay, so they're not representing the buyer at all. They're basically just filling out the paperwork. The buyer probably found the property themselves. And so there's really not a lot of value add to that buyer. And so therefore, that's why this percentage is lower. You can, if you choose, absolutely, you can put 3% in here and you can give everybody the same percentage. But I would say, again, as an average, most people are doing 0 to 1%. So I wouldn't go any less than 1% here. And then again, if you're not offering any compensation, then you definitely need to contact me before we put this listing in the MLS, because if you're not going to charge anything, it cannot go in the MLS. And so then I'm not sure how you would market the property. So keep that in mind. Right here, it states the brokerage relationship, which we talked about this at the very beginning. So this is stating that the broker will act as a transaction broker. And you just need to have a quick conversation with your seller just to tell them that you still are going to use skill and care and diligence in the transaction, and there's limited confidentiality, but you are there to make sure that the transaction succeeds, okay? You're not there to tell them what to do or to give any kind of steering advice that maybe you would be able to give if you're in a single agent relationship. So when I'm talking with, buyers or sellers and I'm in a transaction broker, I always say, if I were in this situation, this is what I would consider. That way you're not telling them what to do, because you don't have that fiduciary relationship with them. You're functioning literally as an intermediary to facilitate the transaction. You represent the transaction. You do not represent the seller in the situation. Conditional termination. So Brix does not charge a cancellation fee. Okay, so this should always be $0. We're not going to charge our clients to get out of work with us. Okay, if somebody doesn't want to work with us, then we're going to honor that and, and hopefully ask, what did I do wrong? What could I do better? But you always want to leave an agreement if they're going to terminate on amicable terms, because if somebody has a bad taste in their mouth, they're going to tell that story tenfold than if they have a good experience. So we always want to leave our sellers, in a situation that if they decide not to work with us, that we are professional and we're not going to charge them to get out. But just because you put 0 in here, if you read this, it says the seller must sign a withdrawal agreement and reimburse the broker for all direct expenses incurred in the marketing of the property. So even if you don't charge them to get out, if you would like them to reimburse you for your advertising or your photos or any flyers or whatever you've put into the property, you would have to have receipts showing what you've paid. And then we could take that to the seller and say, per this agreement and the cancellation agreement that you're going to sign, you're going to give them a dollar amount and you're going to have the receipts attached. They would be expected to reimburse you for that. Okay. But we don't charge a cancellation agreement fee. Dispute resolution. Okay. So this says that if there is a disagreement between the broker and the seller, that they're going to arbitrate rather than litigate. Okay. So if they refuse to initial here, it's okay. Okay. They don't have to initial here, but most people wouldn't. I've never had anybody not, I guess is what I'm saying. So just present it. And the seller is going to sign, the associate's going to sign, and the broker is going to sign. So on all listing agreements, you need to be sending those to me. And so I'm going to show you real quick for those that may not be aware on how you assign initials. So if you click here, you would assign this to either the listing broker, which would be me, it'll come to me, or it would be admin for the Destin office, if that pops up, or if you've typed me in manually as Karri Lindsey. So however you want to do that, you just would click assign and then it's going to be ready for me. And because I'm logged in as myself, I could actually sign now. So that's how you assign it. But again, this is the only section here that has to be signed by me, okay? And you need to make sure because that's what makes your listing agreement valid. If you have a broker's license and you're an associate broker, you still need to send it to the broker to sign, okay? Okay, this just says that this agreement is binding on the seller and broker's heirs, okay? So just because somebody dies does not mean that they would get out of this listing agreement. It would pass down to their heirs. Okay, here we have additional terms. So for instance, if you talk to your seller and you say, hey, we're going to do a 6% listing agreement. However, one thing that I always offer to my sellers is if Brix brings the seller, if Brix brings the buyer, or if I, as the agent, bring the buyer, I will give you 1% off of the listing price, okay? 1% off of the listing commission. So you would put that in additional terms here. So if there are sometimes variable rates, I guess, that other agents do. I've never done them because they get really, what do I want to say, sticky, where it's like if you sell it for $750, then you're going to get 6%. If you sell it for $700, you're going to get 5.5%. If you sell it for $650, you're going to get 5%. That gets really hairy, but this is where you would outline that. And then also, like I said, if you're going to lower your percentage of your commission because you bring the buyer, then you're able to go ahead and put that in here as well. You can also, if it's important to, I had a seller that it was important to them. I mentioned the day-to-day listing agreement. I put that here in additional terms that even though the agreement, is for a 6-month period, Brix will honor a day-to-day listing agreement and the customer is able to cancel at any time at no charge. Again, 0 cancellation fee. Okay, so you can put that in there. If the seller tells you to do anything else, okay, like I don't want this to go in the MLS for a week because I need to do blah, 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 then you would put seller instructs broker to and whatever it is, okay? But again, just be really clear and succinct in what you're putting here so that there's no confusion. And then you have everybody sell it, sign it, not sell it. That's what you're going to do is sell it. You have everybody sign it. And then here, this is so important, and that is why it is starred. Okay, so you have 24 hours after this is signed to return a copy to the seller. And this is something that is high on the auditor's list to check because it's something so easy to forget. So once you send it for signature and you get it all back, just come in, open it up, put your date, email, and shoot it off in an email to them, okay? And then again, use your Brix email so that you can file it in the folder for that seller and you've got proof that you've submitted it within 24 hours. Both PAR and FAR, or ECAR, so both Emerald Coast Association of Realtors and Pensacola Association of Realtors, once this is completely signed and the date here is in effect, you have 2 days to put it in the MLS. Okay, 2 days, unless in PAR you're doing, you have 2 days to put it in the MLS. Let's do that. Let's not confuse anything. Okay, so 48 hours from the time the listing agreement is effective and you have all signatures. Please also keep note that those initials that we talked about are on every page. So the seller and the associate, the agent, must initial every page. On page 3, the broker needs to initial, so you need to make sure that you're sending it to me. And then the people that sign on the last page are the sellers, and the sales associate can sign, okay? And that is it. If you guys have any other questions, please reach out and let me know. Thank you so much. Have a great day.